is to start talking when this comes on, right? There's a delay. Hello, everybody. Just adjusting our screens here. Bear with us for a second. All right, so let's see. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Danilo Thomas, and I'm the managing editor of the Baobab Press, which is the publishing arm of Sundance Books and Music here in glorious Reno, Nevada. I'd like to say thank you first off to Sundance for hosting this event, and to their event staff for getting everything put together and coaching me up on the how-tos, of which I was just struggling through there. So thank you for bearing with me. And thank you all for joining us from wherever you are. Tonight, I am very pleased to welcome our Baobab Press authors, Tiffany and Colin Rafferty, who will be reading selections from their respective works, M Theory, a novel, and Execute the Office, Essays with Presidents. The readings will be followed by a short discussion with the time we have left. If you do have any questions, please, during the live stream, please go ahead and drop them into the YouTube comments, and we will try to address them during the discussion. Thank you all again for coming out. We'd like to note that today's presentation is made possible in partnership with Nevada Humanities and the Nightingale Family Foundation. To start us off, we're going to have Tiffany be reading from M Theory. Tiffany Cates, the author of M Theory, spent 5 years navigating Chicago's transit and weather systems before moving to Oregon and earning her MFA in creative writing from Oregon State University. Strongly influenced by her degrees in philosophy and psychology, Tiffany writes about themes of personhood, the distance between self and other, and matters of free will. She is the founding editor of Townsend, a literary journal devoted to long-form fiction writers, and we're very happy to welcome her.
Thanks, Nilo. All right, to get us started here, I am going to be reading 3 separate excerpts from M Theory. This first section here is when the detective is meeting the young boy who plays the driving force in all of Detective Powell's remaining actions throughout the rest of the novel. 4 hours later, as they drove to the boy's house, Masterson was still mad. Why are we doing this? Blakely and Rankin have been on rotation for weeks. They should be dealing with her. We're the faces she knows. It will only take a minute. My ass, it will only take a minute. You think just because ice cream sales are down, we've got all the time in the world. But it's going to get warmer, Powell, and you're going to regret giving this lady so much attention. It'll be all right. The correlation between ice cream sales and homicide rates was a fact Leslie wished he had never shared. No more than 20 minutes. It was just after the new year and all the schools were back in session. The cold had left things relatively quiet in the Albany Park district, but Leslie never sat easily in the quiet. Quiet made people comfortable, softened their intuition, allowed things to pass unnoticed. You're going to deal with the kid when we get there. I don't have patience for kids. Leslie glanced over at Masterson. Maybe we should check in with some neighbors while we're out there. Christ, Powell. It will only take a minute. I'll handle the kid. You can do a quick door-to-door. It's fucking freezing outside. You realize that, right? Leslie allowed him a moment to pout and watched the kids on Ainsley huddle in groups of 3s and 4s as they traveled the icy sidewalks toward warmer places. Just check in with the mom and hit the neighbors on either side. Find out if they've seen anything. Make sure you ask across the street as well. I hate you. Yeah, well. They arrived at the DuPont home and found it tucked behind a fence-deep pile of untouched virgin white snow. The single-family homes that surrounded it all bore evidence of play. snowmen, makeshift forts, boot tracks, and dog runs. But this one lacked the sense of life beyond the carefully shoveled drive and walkway, both of which held a fresh layer of salt that crunched under their feet as they approached the door. 20 minutes, Powell. Masterson blew into his hands. I'm not doing this shit for more than 20. When the door swung open, there was no hello or acknowledgement from the mother, just a quick flick of a light being turned on in the hall before she moved back into the kitchen. Masterson shot a look before entering and only removed his cap. Leslie followed the sound of a television out into the living room. The house was clean, but not tidy. One window, covered in plastic to keep the heat in. A myriad of Happy Meal toys and junk mail littered most available surfaces, and the television ran in the background, cartoons flashing animated violence and high-speed action to the sound of explosions. Amongst it all, Jamal DuPont sat dressed in his school's uniform of navy slacks, a white polo, and black shoes. A navy blue hoodie, unzipped and hanging precariously off one shoulder, seemed to remain on his body only because the hood remained up over his head. Leslie moved a dining room chair to sit on. Good afternoon, Jamal. Raising the remote, Jamal turned the television up just a notch. I'm Detective Leslie Powell. Your mother asked that we come by and see what's been going on. The boy didn't look at him. His head turned slightly to the side, eyes occasionally looking up from the floor in the direction of the television. It seems you've been having some problems at school? In person, the boy looked younger. His face and belly still held the baby fat of a child, but Leslie could see the man trying to emerge. High cheekbones would be exposed as soon as puberty hit. His shoulders would continue to spread, and his well-defined brow and thickly lashed eyes would convince the smartest girls he was just a sweet, misunderstood boy who'd grown up the hard way. Leslie couldn't save him from any of that, but he could potentially help him with this. So what's been happening, Jamal? The child's shoulders raised and a sigh followed. Nothing. Why did it always have to be nothing? Why couldn't one person look him in the eye and say, this is what's happening, this is who's doing it, and here's the proof? That Leslie could do something with. Nothing. Left him with exactly that. He checked his watch when he heard the front door close behind Masterson. Your mom seems to think you're having some troubles. I don't have any troubles. The speed with which the boy adjusted himself caused the hood to slip from his head, and his eyes caught Leslie's before quickly pulling it back into place. How'd you get the black eye? I fell down the stairs. You hit your eye falling down the stairs. People come up with the wildest tales in order to avoid the truth. Yeah. Jamal dared him to argue with a firm look before holding out his legs. At least 4 inches separated the length from the right from his left. I fall a lot. And the pictures your mom showed us? Without looking, the boy once again raised his legs and gave them a wiggle. Well, there's been some gang activity in the neighborhood, a lot of new tags popping up, and your mom reported. Jamal rose from the couch, tossed the remote on the cushion, and limped past Leslie. I need to get out of my school clothes. At 10 years of age, the boy was already over 5 feet tall. We can only help if you talk to us, Jamal. The slamming of his bedroom door was the only response. So that's it? That's all you can do? His mother stood cross-armed in the entryway. We'll double our patrols around the school for a bit. It wouldn't hurt to see what was happening while the neighborhood lay frozen. I'll make a point to be there in the mornings to keep an eye on him. Leslie lifted the notebook in his hand. I'm assuming he walks Ainsley to Avers? I don't need you to watch my son, Detective Powell. Her words weren't unexpected. I need you to keep an eye on what's happening in this neighborhood and let those little bastards know they need to make different choices. He knew what she needed. The whole city needed it. But there was only so much he could do, and he was doing it. Tucking the chair back under the dining room table, Leslie slipped back into his coat and gave himself a quick pat down for phone and keys before considering the notebook in his hand. Ainsley to Avers? The look she gave him reflected all that separated them from one another. He walks wherever the sidewalks are clear. The air outside was bracing, and Masterson's breath plumed as he spoke with a neighbor across the street. Leslie made his way through salt, street slush, and hidden patches of black ice, only to have Masterson turn around and give the rap signal. You talked to all the neighbors? Half of them aren't home. Masterson headed straight for the car, and Leslie glanced for clear walkways. Why aren't we fining people for not clearing their sidewalks? He watched Masterson slip on some ice and catch himself with the car's roof. It's not our job? You want to add it to the list, though? Leslie maneuvered his way back to the vehicle, planning each step carefully in order to avoid the dangers of wet feet and hidden ice. I told the mom we'd double our patrols. Why did you do that? Masterson's face scrunched in disgust. We can't say we're going to do that. What if something comes up? This isn't even popcorn, pal. This is a woman with too much time on her hands. It will only be a few weeks. Fuck you. Entering the car, Masterson waited for Leslie's door to shut. I'm going to run some background checks on the extended family, see if they have any connections. And when that comes back clean, I don't want to hear another goddamn word about this kid. The next section I will be reading from is our protagonist, Donovan, is meeting his parents for dinner. Normally, Donovan's parents came down from Lansing in March after the last chance of snow had passed, but a never-ending winter had pushed their visit back until after Easter and the end of his break. They stayed at the Winston, where he met them for meals and various Chicago experiences that outsiders assumed made up the city. What he wanted them to see was his city. But his parents never saw anything as his unless it was also, in some way, intricately tied back to them. How about tomorrow I make you breakfast at my place? They were out for their big meat is our specialty meal his father always insisted on, and he never took his eyes from his plate. You know how to cook? Of course I know how to cook. How would I survive if I didn't cook? A microwave and takeout? His mother, who had grown especially good at ignoring their ongoing back and forth banter, was even better at it when wine was involved. She took a sip from her glass and smiled up at no one in particular. Donovan knew her time to talk was coming. Well, I cook, he said. I've been cooking for myself for over a decade now. You could always have a woman cook for you. That's how I got your father. And there it was. Since Donovan had become an educated adult with a career and a retirement plan, his mother's smile most often said, "Give me grandbabies." And Donovan missed the simpler smiles from childhood, the ones that just said, "I love you." She again smiled, a smile not meant for either of them, and then took another sip of her wine. Or maybe it was my charming disposition. The two men looked cautiously across the table at one another before the father continued the most straightforward of the two conversations. Well, we've never seen your apartment. I know. Or maybe it was my body, his mother added. God love you if that was the case. Jesus, Lori. His father's irritation grew more visible each time she spoke. It was a combination of all of the things, okay? All of them. Your cooking, your charming disposition, and your everything else. For me, it was just her orneriness. She winked across the table, this smile saying, I know all the right buttons because I helped install them. And Donovan knew the wine was doing something other than working. My apartment isn't big. You can see the bed from anywhere in the house unless you're in the bathroom with the door shut. His father's eyes finally left his plate. Your bed is in the living room? Well, I prefer to think my bed is in a bedroom without walls. His father stared blankly across the table at him. But it's up for interpretation. Can't wait. One raised eyebrow. That's all his father offered before returning his gaze to his meat. His mother dipped a sliver of lobster into some sauce before taking a bite and moving the conversation toward other plans. What do you want to see this weekend? He saw his father's eyes roll, as they always did when the question was asked, but Donovan answered anyway. See what I want to see. It's at Steppenwolf, some kind of 1950s murder noir. As long as it's not a musical, his father interrupted. I hate musicals. You hate plays, Donald. It doesn't matter if there's music or not. She tossed him a look before turning back to her food. How many tickets should I buy? Fingers brushed across the napkin. The question asked without looking. Words thrown out to remind Donovan that his singledom was a perpetual disappointment to her and a concern for his father. Donovan let the knife slice into his pork chop. He knew how to stop them both, make her happy and prove that he was a man after all. If you want to grab 4, that'd be great. 4? His parents spoke in unison, as if finally on the same team. He couldn't take it back. There's someone I'd like you to meet. It wasn't a lie. Both parents looked at him with the same kind of unintended shock, like he had an 11th finger they'd failed to notice at birth. And there, in that moment, he found it again, that empowered feeling of simply saying he was involved. It added a lightness to the air that helped him breathe a little deeper and sit a little straighter. Is it a woman? His father asked. Dawn. Hey, I've got a right to ask. His hand held up in defense. Yes, she's a woman. Donovan knew all too well what his father thought of him. Questioning his utility had started early and was brought on by the way he spoke and acted toward him. I met her on the train. She's a little bit older than me and she teaches at a nearby school. What does she teach? His mother's eyes were bright and her smile said, let's plan the wedding. Art. She's an artist. She has a studio in her house where she paints. Is she any good? His father, still wanting to find fault where he could. Of course she's good. What's her name? I want to look her up. His mother's phone was already out. I don't want you to look her up, Ma. Come on, why not? You'll see her tomorrow. Should be interesting. His father raised his wine glass to finally meeting someone who understands you. Donovan could cheers to that. And thank God it's a woman. Donovan watched over his pint glass as his parents joined him for a drink, and he determined that his relationship with them could have been made better years ago, simply by lying. He bought flowers, an extra toothbrush, a pink-handled razor. He bought shampoo and body wash that smelled familiar and tickled memories of spring. He lit new candles, dirtied an extra coffee cup, a towel, a washcloth. He used the soaps to fill the space with her scent and dumped half their contents down the drain in case his mother checked their weight to verify the strength of their relationship. Or worse yet, his father checked for the validity of his character. He lay in bed and whispered, I love you, to the pillow that was her head. The last piece that I will be reading is a scene with Donovan meeting Leslie at the hospital. Donovan needed to move the conversation back, but a lingering question poked at his insides and needed to be answered. He tried not to watch the nurse, hunched over, tidying up, asking if they needed anything before leaving the room without so much as a second glance in his direction. How did you wind up at my apartment? He asked. The detective appeared unfazed by the question. Public records. But how? Donovan saw a life already lived when he looked at the man. How did you know to look for me? Silver hair and skin made leathery by too much sun. You were a question mark that kept cropping up. No. Shaking his head, he watched the old man for a sign that he was getting somewhere, but the detective's limp body left few clues. There's no reason for my name to be brought up. Nothing you were looking into related back to me. A shift in the room. The detective smiled a smile, and his hands began gathering the newspapers his eyes had already examined. The murders are related, Donovan. At the very least, tangentially. Opening papers, flipping pages, he spread the words out and over the table, resting above his legs. I'm sure you've read the articles. Of course he had. Emily is linked to all parties, a nexus, if you will. And the only one no one knew about was you. But I had nothing to do with any of that, he said, pointing to the papers. The detective had already begun to appear sleepy, and his speech was beginning to slur. She knew the boy. She knew about Stacharia. Donovan needed more words before the drugs took their full hold of him. I needed to see how you related. It's not about you. It's never been about you. He waited, watched the detective fight to keep his eyes open. You're a pawn in a game. It was always about the boy, really. The detective's voice, barely above a whisper. Thank you. All done.
Yay. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was awesome. And it's so great. I read these books so many times, but to hear them read in your own words is awesome. So thank you for that. Next up, we have Colin Rafferty. Colin Rafferty writes about monuments and memorials, presidents, and more generally public and private histories. In doing research for Execute the Office, he visited the graves of 28 presidents, toured the homes of another 16, and for reasons still unbeknownst to him, was allowed to handle a 4-page letter written by George Washington. Rafferty has taught nonfiction writing at the University of Mary Washington since 2008, developed classes on nonfiction of place, the lyric essay, and writing for multimedia. He's the author of Hallow This Ground and lives in Richmond, Virginia with his wife Elizabeth and their dog. I believe his name is Ginger, in the same neighborhood where Patrick Henry gave the "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech in the presence of 2 future presidents. Colin is surrounded by history. Take it away, Colin.
Great. Thank you so much. This is really exciting to get to share a reading with Tiffany. That book is just fantastic. And 2 to have this kind of moment of getting to share the book with the world. A quick correction: my dog's name is Olaf, which was his name when we adopted him, and he knew his name, so we kept it. And we figure it's either for the 12th century Norwegian king who Christianized the nation, or the snowman from Frozen. One of the two. So the book's subtitle is Essays with Presidents, and the idea behind it was that I would write a short lyric essay for each one of the 40, at the time, 45 presidents, although there's also a 46th essay in there as well. And it was a chance to kind of both explore the history of the United States in sort of the most obvious way, but also to mess around with forms of nonfiction and try to see what the genre could do. So I'm going to start in the most obvious place to start, which is, of course, James K. Polk, our 11th president. Each essay starts with a kind of little intro place marker that situates each president in history as related to kind of 3 major events that affect our concept of the presidency. One is the ratification of the Constitution, which obviously creates the office. Another is the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, which is kind of the most powerful, dynamic use of executive power. And then the third one is Richard Nixon's resignation, the only time that has happened in the history of the United States. So this is an essay called State of the Union, and it starts like this. James K. Polk, 11th President of the United States, 1845 to 1849, 58 years since the Constitution, 14 years until the Emancipation, 125 years until the resignation. In performing for the first time the duty imposed on me by the Constitution of giving to you information of the state of the Union and recommending to your consideration such measures as in my judgment are necessary and expedient, I am happy that I can congratulate you on the continued prosperity of our country. First State of the Union, 1845. The State of the Union is red. The State of the Union is warlike, blood-tinged. The State of the Union is unknown to you in the present day, the long smear of history obscuring your view between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. The State of the Union is red with exertion, expansion, with Texas annexation, with the incursion of foreign troops upon American soil, the red-faced shame of invasion, even invented, the red-faced fury of invasion, even invented. The State of the Union is, as regards Mexico, not of the American character, with which it is our desire to cultivate with all foreign nations. The State of the Union is a man from Tennessee, James Knox Polk, asking Congress for a declaration, receiving it, sending men into war's red mouth. The State of the Union is Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee serving in the same army, future blue and future gray covered by the red of war. The State of the Union is the halls of Montezuma. The State of the Union is an occupied Mexico City. The State of the Union is 1,733 men killed in battle in less than 2 years, a generation of soldiers practicing the tactics they will eventually use on each other. The State of the Union is read, and read, meaning a written document, delivered to Congress from the president as established by Jefferson. Jefferson always better read than heard, as it will be until Wilson addresses Congress in 70 years. The State of the Union is words arranged in order to create an effect, a tactical plan, a charm offensive, straight talk to the American people via their representatives. For Polk, always something red. As the wisdom, strength, and beneficence of our free institutions are unfolded, every day adds fresh motives to contentment and fresh incentives to patriotism. Second State of the Union Address, 1846. The State of the Union is white. The State of the Union is a sullied white, a stained white, a white working overtime to maintain its existence. The State of the Union is a white president who owns human beings and seeks to preserve that peculiar institution. The State of the Union is a white man who owns more than 50 men at his death, fewer than 100 days after leaving office. The State of the Union is a question we have asked for its entire existence. How are we to live together as equals? The State of the Union is a line drawn between the numerator and the denominator, 3/5, a line Mason and Dixon trace onto the map, a line extending into the territories, beneath this, above that. The State of the Union is an 8% cash profit on his plantation. The State of the Union is more than half of his slaves' children dying before age 15. The State of the Union is a meeting between past and future as fellow Congressmen John Quincy Adams and Abraham Lincoln oppose Polk's war and its expansion of slavery, an attempt to keep the peculiar institution that pulls this country apart from growing into new territories. The State of the Union is white, a surrender, a giving up. The State of the Union asks, what can we do? The State of the Union says this peculiar institution simply is nothing to be done. It has ever been our cherished policy to cultivate peace and goodwill with all nations, and this policy has been steadily pursued by me. Third State of the Union Address, 1847. The State of the Union is blue. The State of the Union is below. The State of the Union promises one term only, serves one term only. The State of the Union is true blue, is loyal. The State of the Union is hiding its weakness, its fractures. The State of the Union does not have long, 12 years until that congressman from Illinois is inaugurated and the guns fire on Fort Sumter, fracturing the Union. The State of the Union will become the blue of the sky above the fields of Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, filling with cannon smoke as the battles progress. The State of the Union is a bluish tinge on the lips of the dying Polk, dead 3 months after leaving office, a man who never sees what his work and words have wrought. It may indeed be truly said that my administration has fallen upon eventful times. Fourth State of the Union Address, 1848. The State of the Union is an acronym, SOTU, a continuance, so too. The State of the Union goes on. The State of the Union endures. Listen to what each president says each year as Congress and the cameras watch. The State of the Union is strong, the president will likely say. The vice president will clap from behind. Depending on the election, the Speaker of the House may or may not applaud. The State of the Union is strong. The State of the Union endures. The State of the Union asks, how are we to live together? And well, what now? Well, what now? I feel an affinity with Polk just because after a year of quarantine, he and I have the same haircut. He had a kind of magnificent mullet that I have now accidentally cultivated myself. So it seemed appropriate to start with him. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. I want to read the Harry S. Truman essay, which is one of those essays that kind of comes with, you read an interesting fact in a book. And the interesting fact in a book that I read was in Kristen Iverson's Full Body Burden, which is a memoir about growing up in the shadow of the Rocky Flats nuclear plant, which was not a power plant. It just made plutonium triggers for nuclear bombs. And I found out that there are rooms in that former facility that are so polluted and so contaminated with radioactivity that they've just been sealed shut and they can never be opened, and they're called infinity rooms. And that is just one of those moments when, like, the world of writing just drops a gift in your lap. And so this is an essay called Infinity Room. Infinity Room. Harry S. Truman, 33rd President of the United States, 1945 to 1953, 158 years since the Constitution, 82 years since emancipation, 21 years until the resignation. Which is a room so contaminated with nuclear waste, byproducts of bomb making, that it is sealed and can never be opened again. A room that to step inside it without safety gear means certain death. A room in which ordinary things, gloves, a hammer, a chair, have become death, the destroyer of worlds. A room that will always exist but did not exist until the day Harry Truman, newly president, Roosevelt's brain having bled out 13 days earlier, first steps into the Infinity Room, which is a room in the White House in which Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, looks the new president in the face, a new president after 12 steady years of Roosevelt, after 4.5 years of the world at war, after 3.5 years of America at war, with the knowledge of Nanking, Bataan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, with the Soviets, 26 million dead at the gates of Berlin, and plans made for the American invasion of Japan, possibly 1 million American casualties, they assume, twice the number of dead so far. He looks him in the face and says, "Sir, there is a weapon." And Truman closes his eyes and finds himself in the Infinity Room, which is a field in France in 1918, where young Lieutenant Truman directs artillery fire onto a different German army. He is seeing the physical toll of war, the scarred faces, the mangled horses, the ground itself torn open by the shells he fires to kill other men. He breathes air free for now of phosgene or mustard gas, knows their telltale scents, new mown hay, garlic, knows poison, knows bombs, knows what a dying soldier in an invaded country looks like and sounds like as he takes his last breath, for he has seen them in the Infinity Room, which is a doctor's office in Independence, Missouri, in which a young boy is fitted for his first pair of eyeglasses. He is no longer short-sighted, no longer far-sighted. For the first time, he can see clearly what is before him: the doctor, the lamp, the chart on the wall, the door that leads to the Infinity Room, which is on the 3rd floor of an office building in Hiroshima, which is in the basement of a house in Nagasaki, which is on an island in Pennsylvania, a farmer's field in Ukraine, a ranch in New Mexico. Each one leads us to a new place, the Infinity Room, which is an old man's bedroom in Independence, which has always been here. His glasses are on the nightstand. Some people ask him how he can live with the bomb's weight, how the shadows burned into the walls of the cities do not haunt him at every moment. He tells them that he never lost any sleep, the buck stopping bluntly with him before leading once more into the Infinity Room, which is a military warehouse that is storing 500,000 Purple Hearts, medals ordered in advance of an invasion that never happened. Enough medals to carry us through the dead and wounded of Korea, of Vietnam, of Iraq and Afghanistan, and dozens of other incursions and intrusions around the world, with 100,000 or so still remaining in their dark boxes, waiting for their presentation to the survivors, while the doors of the Infinity Room open again and again and again, revealing to us the impossible choices we ask mortals to make. All right. I'm going to jump way back now and go to Jefferson, just because as somebody who lives in Virginia now, I feel like I should put in a Virginian, and luckily there are 8 Virginians to choose from. So this is another one of those essays that started with thinking about the forms of nonfiction. And I thought, well, a prayer is a kind of essay, right? It's literally an attempt. And it seemed appropriate for Jefferson as you know, a deist president who made his own version of the Bible by cutting out all the miracles from the text and just kind of keeping the moral teachings, that a prayer to him and perhaps for him might be worthwhile. So this is called The Apologist. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States, 1801 to 1809, 14 years since the Constitution, 54 years until emancipation, 165 years until the resignation. The miracles are all missing. The mammoths are extinct. Forgive me, Thomas Jefferson, for how I use you now. Forgive me my trespasses, how easily I see others ascribe words to your mouth that never left it, how they claim that you said eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, or bad government results from too much government, or the Bible is the source of liberty, or speech that condemns a free press are the words of a tyrant. See them bend you to their own arguments for small government, for big government, and forgive me the way that I say nothing in your defense. Forgive me the way I hold your contradictions, your all men are created equal, rubbing against the slaves of Monticello, your pursuit of happiness against your dusky Sally. Forgive me the time I spent in the museum looking at your homemade Bible, all the miracles cut out, all the moral teachings left. Forgive me the 10 years I spent in a school run by a church. Forgive me my church, my state. Forgive me that I do not head into the wilderness, keeping watch for the woolly mammoth, the way you instructed Lewis and Clark to do. Forgive me when cashiers do not recognize the $2 bill as legal tender. Forgive me for what this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar, a moment of peace bought with a portrait of you. Forgive me, for I have seen your declaration under bulletproof glass, and I don't know how a living document can breathe when it is trapped in noble gas, a kind of elemental aristocracy. Forgive me, for I have forgotten the joys of France. Forgive me for laughing at freedom fries. Forgive me, Thomas Jefferson, for the times I have become you, when I spend too much, when I take too much pleasure in food and wine, when I make my own Louisiana purchases and do not ask permission. Forgive me, Thomas Jefferson, sage of Monticello, for you had such plans for this country, and I do not know that we have fulfilled them. On the campus of what they still call Mr. Jefferson's University, we have painted words of accusation on your statue in the middle of the night, racist and rapist, and the defense for libel is to show the veracity of the statement. Near your university, there is a memorial for a young woman who died when a white supremacist struck her with his vehicle. Thomas Jefferson, did you curse this country when you opened up a native burial ground on your property so that you could explore how they buried their dead? When you declared a wall of separation between church and state, what else did you build? Thomas Jefferson, why do I look to you to forgive us when perhaps you should be the one asking for forgiveness? Kennedy said that a gathering of Nobel laureates was the greatest gathering of talent in the White House, except when you dined alone. But I look at the results of this grand experiment of democracy, and I'm sorry to say that I observe only turbidity. All right, I'm going to read, I think, 2 more here. This one is Theodore Roosevelt. It's called Bully. Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States, 1901 to 1909, 114 years since the Constitution, 38 years since emancipation, 65 years until the resignation. They call him T.D. as a boy, as the weak boy shut up in the family's brownstone on 20th Street, T.D. Roosevelt, shut in the brownstone, the Gilded Cage, the volume of J.P. Wood's Natural History, His Way Out, words and pictures in the low light of a stormy Manhattan afternoon, what aggravates his lungs, excitement, exertion, strain, the things the industrial and natural worlds outside his windows share in common, could provide to him if he could only catch his breath, if only his small lungs did not seize. They tell him he can never be out, he can never be in the world. When he cannot breathe, his father is the one who can best convince his lungs to unclench their fists, to calm the fight, to bring peace. His father, the philanthropist, the good man, the man who taught his son that he would not tolerate selfishness or cruelty, idleness, cowardice, or untruthfulness. But the father also the man who paid another man to take his place in the war, the son's shame at this. But the father still the man, against the doctors, encourages him to exercise, to break asthma's grip on him, then boxing and wrestling and hiking and everything else. And from the father, the idea takes root in him of power and kindness, that the weakness inside him can be overcome through work. If he can work harder than everyone else, then he cannot fail. And then the willingness to take up the fight in all the ways. Yes, the Rough Riders. Yes, San Juan Hill. Yes, the Great White Fleet. Yes, big stick diplomacy. But also the fight in America. So trust busting. So a minimum guaranteed wage. So a pure Food and Drug Act. So inviting Booker T. Washington to dinner at the White House, the first Black man to dine there as a guest, the Southern Democrats enraged, but Theodore will not be bullied, will not stop the fight, the breathless rush of change and excitement in the opening years of the 20th century. Even the safari to Africa after leaving office, because the violence of hunting leads to the strength of education. Decades after reading J.P. Wood on 20th Street, he helps fill the Smithsonian's new Natural History Museum. Even his speeches, a staccato blast in his surprisingly gentle voice, a voice combining both the refined and the natural, Harvard and the outdoors, the rules and the breaking of the rules. He's president because his enemies stick him in the least powerful position in America, the vice presidency, but then Czolgosz and McKinley meet, so then kindness. He inherits almost a full term, elected again on his own, so he will not seek a second elected term, a third term really, and instead his friend Taft's ascend to the office. And strength 4 years later because his friend means well, but he means feebly, and this is not a place for the weak to lead. When he loses, he saves himself through work, sending himself down a tributary of the Amazon, the river of doubt, and survives what should have killed most other men, the illness, the injury, the natives who debate nightly about killing the white men in their midst and decide not to kill, the mercy of strength. I do not mean to praise him or his strength or to suggest he is without flaw. He is with flaw, or to argue that combat is our first route to success because that has not been America's story these days, or my story, or perhaps not your story. But there is something in the striving that I admire, something in the desire to gain power so that it might be used well for the less fortunate. That seems like the best impulse of this country, because either a constitution written by white landowning males has malfunctioned because it has expanded its rights to people they did not or could not conceive of as human, or it has functioned exactly the way they meant it to function, unclenching the freedoms it took violently, letting them expand, letting them breathe, letting the air of liberty rush into the lungs. Teddy becomes Theodore. He dies at night, asleep, his lungs, of course, one son ahead of him in the darkness shot down over Germany in the war to end war, and another son telegraphing the remaining siblings, the old lion is dead. I don't know if I believe the metaphor of president as father, but it seems fair to ask, what did they give when they walked the halls with us as our lungs seized and we gasped for breath? The fight? The peace? I think I'll stop there, actually, because I think that's just about my time. But thank you. This has been really wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin. Those were excellent selections. You got some of my favorites in there. Yeah, so now we'll just jump into our conversation portion of the evening, if you will. It was a great honor and pleasure for us to, get involved with these books, and as we were trying to get this event together, and seeing the ways in which they overlap, there's a lot that kind of seemed somewhat obvious, having read them, been so immersed with them for the last year. But I think it's great. And just hearing you all read it again, I hear them again, in Tiffany's, this sort of ideas of communication and how we communicate, and sort of our nuanced varieties of between Donovan and his mother, and how he reads Leslie. And then, in Colin's, these sort of ideas of continuity or inheritance, which is a lot of, I think, of what that project is about. And those two ideas sort of merged for me anyway, in the notion of interpretation, how you and or your characters or these historical figures interpret, right? Because that's what you mean to say and how you're saying it, and how we sort of evaluate that. So I'd like to start with Tiffany. I know Tiffany has a very interesting point of view that she takes in M theory, and we see it, through Donovan's characters and Leslie's character. But Tiffany, could you talk a little bit more about that and why you chose that for the novel?
Why I chose what exactly?
The sort of free and direct discourse that we travel through. There's a sort of guarded, veiled, for instance, the way that we're in Donovan's point of view, but we're reading, the mother try to speak with their son in a certain way, and where he both, sort of fully understands what she's doing, but doesn't. And that, sort of uneasiness goes throughout the book. there's also obviously the multiple character perspective. So either of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. The free and indirect discourse was something that I was really, really drawn to, because I feel like it really helps create an unreliable narrator, in that the story is told third person close, right? But the descriptive words that you wind up putting in there send messages to the reader as they're going along that will make them feel certain ways. And I tried to be very careful with specific words for various characters. Like, this is a silly one, but the word determined should only show up in Donovan's segments, because Donovan determines things. And yet the word determine can bring about a lot of connotation for the reader as they're reading it. But then there's also the slip of Donovan's conscious thought that comes into the narrative as well. And that really came about through my mentor, Chris Boucher. He kept telling me this phrase over and over: you need to make it louder. You need to lean in and you need to make it louder. And I spent a lot of time trying to protect Donovan as a character, which might sound insane, but I really did have a strong desire to protect him. But the moment I let go of that and could let his subconscious mind come on to the page, I was free. Like, I was no longer responsible for what was happening, because there was an other present on the page. So.
Awesome. Yeah. The clues and hints and, sort of the lack of omniscience, right? There's a certain amount of authority that you pull off extremely well there, and, allowing the reader, through their own sort of experience, make assumptions in some degree to what characters are what they mean or what they're intending by their actions, which is a really interesting formal move. And then this idea of slipping into otherness, right? I think is in your book especially, you read a lot of Fight Club, the classic, right? Like, there is Tyler Durden, and there's whoever the other one is, right? I mean, and then they're split off, whereas Donovan's consciousness is one of the same mind to some extent, and he's trying to figure it out, as much as arguing himself, but of the same mind, literally and figuratively, which leads into Colin's essays in a way, is that the presidents, right, are maybe some ways this idea of not believing that they're the metaphor of the father of the country, but in some ways are representative conscious, right? And over history, there's many voices to add to that. So I don't know if something in that line added to the reason or why you made your formal choices, Colin.
I mean, I think there's that interesting notion of the kind of public performance of the president, but also the private existence of the human being who happens to be president, and thinking about that dynamic, and thinking about the kind of speech act. I mean, the State of the Union is a good example of that one, right? Here is this, because it's this vague thing in the Constitution. It's just from time to time, the president should deliver this address to Congress. And even the question of what does it mean to deliver an address to Congress has changed. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the approaches in terms of language kind of came from a consideration of those two roles, right? Who was this person as president, but also who was this person as a person, and trying to think about, the human elements of things, right? The Truman, the Truman essay kind of hinges on that notion that there was one person who decided to drop 2 atomic bombs on cities, right? Not on military installations, but on cities. And it was Harry Truman. And he, it's this sort of impossible, like the question of like, how do you live with that is sort of amazing. And his response, like, I never lost any sleep, is also just similarly just bonkers. And to try to work with that notion of the president as like commander in chief, but also as a human being making decisions was always, I think, always part of the process of writing them and figuring out how to write about them.
Yeah, how do you think that, I mean, that the humanity, the human level of, or the idea of humans, I think permeates both of these and both, the actions. And I don't know if does that influence, you said like the infinity room sort of fell in your lap, but there's objects and all sorts of sundry items that appear and execute the office. Did that, how those things like spoke to their humanity? Did that influence how you selected them, or was there something else going on?
In part, I think. I mean, I'm just kind of a chump for like the thingness of history, right? I remember my wife and I toured Independence Hall in Philadelphia years ago, and I remember you leave the room where they drafted the Constitution and all that, and then as you go downstairs, they say like, well, now this is the banister that the delegates use. So when you hold this banister, it's you're holding the same, like, and I know it's just like, please hold the banister as you go down the stairs, like it's a safety. But I still had this sort of moment of like, wow, like, oh boy. So that thingness of history is, for me, often a kind of spark to writing, right? I mean, I mentioned in the Jefferson essay, right, his homemade Bible, and that essay came out of the fact that, like, for a while, a couple of years ago, the Smithsonian Institution had his Bible on display, and I went and saw it, and just kind of reckoning with like the reality of it was often an entry point into the essays, because I think it's very easy to just view them as, at worst a name, right? Like, what does anybody know about Millard Fillmore? Except that he was president. But, all of them had these kind of bizarre, complicated lives that often say something about our existence as a country and as citizens of that country.
Yeah, it's amazing just by how it sort of telescopes out from these individual 500 ships. Great essay in there, but how, you're able to work inside and outside, the individual to the larger ramifications of history, and sort of talk about, even technological advances and the slowness of them, and artwork through those. And then like both of these texts, I think, are working well with, images, themes, and something I keep writing down when I was reading these is, the sort of William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, debate, the no ideas but in things, and no things but in ideas. And, I think that those are working really well on that human level in both of these texts. And Tiffany's, having one of the things I loved when I first read this book was I used to take the red line up and down the Chicago coastline there, and seeing the brown line featured so heavily in this book was amazing. Tiffany, as far as an image or a place, or in Colin's notion of thingness, what spoke to you about the Chicago transit system?
Before I answer your question, I just have to say publicly that Colin's book is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. Like, you might say it's 45 essays about the presidents, but that's not good enough. It's truly beautiful, and thank you for writing it. Now, your question, what struck me about Chicago transit is we didn't have a car when we lived there, and so for 5 years public transit was my means of getting around, and I was always on a schedule, and regardless of whether or not I was at the time going to school or working or trying to get my kids to school, there were you saw the same people, you saw the same people. You knew the people that you saw if you were running late. You knew the people you saw if you were going to be early. And you do wind up thinking that you know something about these people, even if you're only on the train with them for, one stop, or maybe if you're lucky, like 12 minutes, right? You think you know them through conversations, or even the lack of conversation. And it was interesting to me. And one of the things that inspired me to write was noticing that someone was no longer there. Like, what happened to that person? I would have no way of knowing. I had never spoken to them before, and it's not the sort of thing you can type into Google, So the people who come and go, who are routinely there, and then all of a sudden they're not.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you were almost compelled to fill in the gaps of that narrative. Whereas I think a lot of times with, our figureheads of state, we only assume that what is written about them is the only thing that there is of them, right? So on one, sort of the process of, filling in the gaps comes from different, an absence, or maybe, on your end, whereas Colin's is more like it's all in your face, but you're missing what's behind it, sort of thing. I don't know. But, on that notion, as far as writing these books goes, did you have to, what was that process like? Were you actively like on trains thinking like, I'm going to write about this, or was it something that came after the fact? I mean, the idea of like things versus ideas, did you see the book for what it was while you were doing it, or did you have to sort of conceptualize it? I don't know if that question is very clear, but
I never rode the train thinking I'm going to write a book about riding the Brown Line. If I had ever had that thought, I probably never would have written the book, because I probably would have been paying too much attention, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I think it is more about the entire experience: the sunrises, the sunsets, the change in temperature inside and outside the train, given the seasons, and the tightness of rush hour. And yeah, I would have been paying too much attention had I gone into it intentionally, I think.
Which again seems like sort of the opposite maybe for you, Colin, or did you have?
In a way, yes. I think also in a way, no, because this project also started for me because I moved from Alabama, where I had done my graduate work, to Virginia in 2008, and so I went from a state that has no presidents from it. It has one vice president, and he served for like a couple of weeks and then died. Rufus King, by the way, fascinating character. But that was never in play in elections. And then I moved to Virginia in 2008, which was suddenly up in play. And suddenly, I'm teaching at a school named for George Washington's mother. Obama and Biden are giving campaign speeches on my campus. There's just presidents everywhere. And I realized that I had this kind of gap in my knowledge of, like I couldn't name all the presidents in order, basically. And that seemed wrong to me for some, Eagle Scout reason. And so I decided that the most complicated way that I could learn the presidents in order would be to read a biography of each president, like one per month leading up to the next election. And so I started doing that. And it really wasn't until kind of two-thirds of the way through that a friend said to me, well, I hope you get a book out of it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I could. I guess I could try for that. And then I kind of started like thinking about like, okay, well, how do I, if I do essays about these, what would I do, and what would those look like? And wrote a couple kind of test essays. The McKinley one was an early essay. The Grant one was an early essay, and kind of went, oh, these are fun to write, and they're certainly like different from stuff I've written before. So like, let's see if we can make a book out of it. And so then I had, I said at the beginning of the reading that I had this idea of like messing around with nonfiction as a form. And so I had this kind of checklist of like, okay, what are nonfiction forms? Well, and some fit really nicely with presidents, right? Like, a prayer in Thomas Jefferson or a movie script in Ronald Reagan. But other ones like the State of the Union address, I was like, well, okay, somebody has to have delivered, that'll fit for somebody. And it just kind of worked, but, with Polk. So it was a, I agree with Tiffany. Like if I had gone into that kind of reading project of like, let me learn all about the presidents so that I can write a book about them, I think I would have run away from that idea. But it just kind of came out of this, like, I think like Steve Martin once said that obsession is a great substitute for talent. And that is absolutely kind of how it worked for me.
Awesome. Well, we are nearing the end of our time together here, folks. But I think I'd be remiss to not ask some sort of craft question here at the end. Based off of those ideas and the development, both y'all seem to be have stylistic and formal ideas in mind. They're not beginning, middle, end type books. Can you tell me a little bit about why you make those choices, or just talk about those a little bit in whatever way you see fit?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start that. I'll just talk quickly about the structure of the overall novel itself. Originally, Leslie was not supposed to be in the book, which is kind of funny to think about now. He was supposed to be a different story altogether. And it was just going to rotate back and forth between Donovan and Emily. And then I realized Emily can't actually be a voice in the novel because she's dead at the beginning. And so that doesn't make sense. And so then I started writing chapters from people who were close to Emily. And I started working out that way, and then realized Donovan is going to have to be talking to the police at some point. And the whole novel was probably cut up, like literally I would print it and cut up the pages and move pieces around and make myself absolutely insane just trying to get it to sit right. And I don't think that it actually sat right until at some point last year, really. When I handed over an entirely different book after, like, you all had graciously accepted to publish it. And then I added all of Leslie's chapters after. So that was scary. That was scary because I thought I was going to be in big trouble all of a sudden, but it worked out. It worked out, and I'm very thankful. But it was a crazy, crazy rodeo trying to get all of those pieces lined up. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah.
That's funny because it's a magnificent piece of artistry, and it's so eloquent that you would never think that it was came into the world through such a violent throes. But
I literally shaved my head bald at one point. Yeah, on the same day I cut up my manuscript. I shaved my head bald.
There you go.
Yeah, crazy making.
That absolutely blows my mind. I mean, because like Leslie is such a sort of integral character, like an essential character for the book. I mean, to find out that because it is. I mean, it's so like beautifully, intricately plotted. And I mean, I finished reading it just recently, and it's a book that I imagine rewards rereading, right? With that sense of like, oh wow, like, oh, look at how that pulls together. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. I got really lucky with this, just in there's obviously an order and a structure to just, okay, you start with George Washington, you go through to, whoever the new guy is at the end. And yet, like, sticking that landing was a difficult process. I finished a really rough prototype draft in the fall of 2016, and just had this idea of like, yeah, okay, great. Like, I'll just let it sit. We'll tack a Hillary essay on, and boom, right? Like, send it out. And then, my wife had to stop me from throwing it in like the equivalent of the digital fireplace, I guess. And she's like, just sort of hang tight and let's see kind of what happens. And then was kind of able to find a way into writing about Trump, and then in an essay that did not make the final cut. In fact, I think that was the one we revised the most, like just from sheer like, no, this isn't, like, try again. No, let's try again. And even then, like the ending was the run up to publication date was a little bit like, you know, holding your breath, because it's like, I think everything works. Like we found a way to kind of fit in for like the 46th president without knowing who the 46th president would be. And so like finishing the book was, for a book that has a really obvious structure to it, finishing the book was really tough. I think we did it though.
Yeah, I think it explodes into infinity in a very good way. All right. Well, awesome. This was a pleasure. I am so thankful y'all joined us. Thank you for everyone joining us on YouTube Live. Both of these fine folks' books are available at Sundance Books and Music and wherever you buy your literature. Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.